cell membrane is made up of lipids, especially phospholipids, and they are made up of proteins, in which they are made up of integral proteins and peripheral proteins. Do you think the concentration of carbohydrates, proteins, lipids and all that in all the organism is the same? No, the percentage can change, right? So osmosis actually helps the substances to move into and out of the cell from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. So therefore, osmosis is the process that is involved here. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to the session on biology for class 11th CBSE. I'm Dr. Divya, Biology Faculty, Vidhyaashram School of Excellence, Mysuru. So in this session, let us learn about cell membrane in eukaryotes under the chapter Cell, the Unit of Life. So we'll look into the structure and functions of the cell membrane in eukaryotes and then move on to learning about MCQs under this particular topic. So talking about the cell membrane, it is present both in the plants and the animals, which is also called as the plasma membrane. And they have a particular structure. Why? Because they are the first layer of the plant cell, and they are very, very important because it is that layer that actually protects the entire plant cell. So to know about what is there in the cell membrane, how did the scientists or people get to know about the cell membrane? We need to know about the chemical studies that have been conducted on the cell membrane. So what is the cell membrane made up of? It is mainly composed of lipids, especially the phospholipids. So phospholipids are nothing but they are the lipids which are attached to a phosphate group. So they're made up of phospholipids, and apart from having lipids, they also have proteins, and to some extent they also have carbohydrates, which is a polysaccharide. And the major lipids that are there, as I told you, majorly cell membrane is made up of lipids. In that, they are made up of especially phospholipids, and these phospholipids are arranged in bilayer. Bilayer meaning when we look at the lipid structure, they have two layers of, or when we look at the cell membrane, the phospholipids are always arranged in two layers like this. So this forms the first layer and this is the second layer, like a sandwich. They are arranged like a sandwich. So therefore, it is called as bilayer arrangement. Bi means two. It is a bilayer arrangement. And also the lipids are arranged within the membrane with the polar head. So this forms the polar head of the lipid, which is always exposed to the outside of the cell, and it has a non-polar tail. This forms the non-polar tail. The non-polar tail is also called as the hydrophobic. It is called hydrophobic because phobia means it doesn't like something. So in this particular case, the tail of the lipid, they have an aversion towards water. They do not like water, and hence they always are present within or in towards the inside of the cell or towards the cytoplasm of the cell. They are arranged. That is, they are arranged towards the inner part of the cell. So why they are arranged towards the inner part of the cell? As I told you, the tails of the lipid that are there, they are non-polar. They do not love water. They are hydrophobic, and that is why the non-polar tail should always be protected from the aqueous environment. Why? Because they are hydrophobic. They do not like water. And these non-polar tails are made up of nothing but saturated hydrocarbons which do not like water, or they have a repulsion towards water, and hence they should be placed towards the inside, protected towards the inside of the membrane. So that is the reason. And apart from these cell membrane having phospholipids, as I told you, majorly they are made up of phospholipids. Apart from that, they also have proteins, carbohydrates, and to some extent they have cholesterol as well. So this is the bilayer structure of the lipid, wherein you can see this is the lipid bilayer. This forms the one of the layer and the next layer, and you can see they have the polar head. This is also the polar head, which is situated outside, towards outside of the cell. Say for example, this is a cell. So here the polar heads will be there like this. It is always towards the outside. You can imagine it like this. It is always towards the, and here there will be other neighboring cells like this which are arranged. They are always towards the outside like this, and the tail is always arranged towards the inside. So this is how the cell membrane is always arranged. So they are always arranged towards the inside. So it is made up of a lipid bilayer. And apart from having lipids, they also contain proteins, they also contain carbohydrates, and to some extent they also contain cholesterol as well. So this is the chemical structures. Now we know what are the different chemicals or chemical components present in the cell membrane: phospholipids, carbohydrates, proteins, and cholesterol. So, and wherein the phospholipid is the major one, which forms a bilayer, wherein they have the polar head and they have the non-polar tail. The non-polar tails are hydrophobic in nature, made up of saturated hydrocarbons. They are always present towards the inner side of the cell. They are arranged, and the head of the lipid is always, that is polar head of the lipid, is always arranged towards the outside of the cell. So this is about the chemical studies. Next, talking about the cell membrane in detail. So we had studied that the cell membrane, apart from having lipids and carbohydrates and cholesterol, they are also made up of proteins. They have some membrane proteins, and these membrane proteins, for easy understanding, the scientist, or based on how easy they are for extraction, the membrane proteins are classified into two types. One is the integral proteins and the peripheral proteins. The name itself says integral protein, meaning it is embedded within the plasma membrane or within the cell membrane. Peripheral protein means, periphery means towards the outside. So peripheral proteins are always present on the plasma membrane or on the lipid bilayer. So peripheral proteins, they lie on the surface of the membrane, while the integral proteins are partially buried or sometimes totally buried in the membrane. As you can see here, this forms the peripheral membrane protein. So you can see they are totally or partially, they can be buried between the two lipid bilayers, that is in the membrane. So therefore they are called as the integral proteins. So these are the integral protein, and these that you can see, these which are present on the membrane, they are called as the peripheral membrane proteins. So these are the integral membrane proteins and the peripheral membrane proteins. So peripheral membrane proteins are always present towards the surface, on the edges. They are present on the head of the lipid bilayer, whereas integral proteins are always present, embedded or buried totally or partially within the plasma membrane or within the cell membrane. So cell membrane is made up of lipids, especially phospholipids, and they are made up of proteins, in which they are made up of integral proteins and peripheral proteins. So far we know about this. Now this is about fluid mosaic model. Fluid mosaic model is an important topic in in this chapter. Why? Because it usually appears in the exam along with the diagram they will ask. So fluid mosaic model, the credit for fluid mosaic model goes to Singer and Nicholson. So these two scientists in the year 1971. So this is Nicholson and Singer. In the year 1961, they actually proposed the fluid mosaic model of DNA. Why they called it as fluid? Because they got to know that the lipid bilayers are quasi-fluid in nature. They are quasi-fluid in nature, and they call it as mosaic because they are arranged in bilayers, and when we look at the lipid bilayer or the plasma membrane under the microscope, it looked like mosaic. So that is why they called it as the fluid mosaic model. So the quasi-fluid nature of lipid. So what is this quasi-fluid nature of lipid? So quasi-fluid nature of lipid means that the proteins, so whatever substances, especially the proteins, are entering through the plasma membrane or through the lipid bilayer, they can travel freely wherever they want through the phospholipids. So that is what it means. So that is why they have called it as the quasi-fluid nature of lipid enables the lateral movement of proteins within the overall bilayer of the phospholipid. So we had studied, right? So it is made up of two layers. That is, it is a bilayer. So two layers. So here, whatever protein, so these are the protein molecules. I'll write it as P. So whatever proteins are trying to enter, it is not necessary that they have to move in one direction only. They can go here, they can go here, They can end directly, they can go diagonally like this. Wherever they want, they can travel across the lipid bilayer. Why? Because it is because of the quasi-fluid nature of the plasma membrane, and that statement or that research was done by Singer and Nicholson. So this ability of the proteins to move within the membrane is measured as its fluidity. What do you mean by fluidity? Fluidity, water is fluid. You pour water, water can run around here and there, right? It can move wherever it wants. That is its fluidity. Same way here, the fluidity of the plasma membrane is in such a way that whatever proteins is trying to pass through the plasma membrane into the cytoplasm of the cell, it can move in any direction it wants within the lipid bilayer. So that is what quasi-fluid nature means. And the fluid nature of membrane is very, very important, not just for the movement of proteins, but it is also important for some of the functions like cell growth, because more fluidity means the expansion of the cell is easy. If it is very rigid, can the cells expand properly? Not possible. So therefore, for cell growth, the fluidity of the cell plasma membrane is very, very important. It is important for the formation of intercellular junctions. So intercellular junctions between the cells means these will form the intercellular junctions between the cells. Whatever gap is there, that is the intercellular junctions between the cell. For that development, it is very, very important. It helps in the secretion of various substances. It helps in endocytosis. It helps in cell division. For all these, quasi-fluid nature or the fluidity of the plasma membrane or the fluidity of the lipid bilayer is very, very important. And these finding, the credit goes to Singer and Nicholson. The credit goes to Singer and Nicholson. So this is what he proposed. So this you have to remember because it is very, very important for the exam, the fluid mosaic model. So finally, what does the fluid mosaic model states? The fluid mosaic model states that the plasma membrane is made up of a lipid bilayer, and the phospholipids are arranged in such a way that they are quite fluid in nature, and that fluidity helps the proteins to move freely wherever it needs to. So that is a quasi-fluid nature. That is about the fluid mosaic model of plasma membrane. So this is about the cell membrane in eukaryotes. So we shall move on to learning about some of the MCQs that can be framed for this particular topic. So the first question, cell membrane is mainly composed of, it is composed of lipids and cellulose, proteins and cellulose, lipids and proteins, lipids and chitins. So here, if you remember, what did we study? What is the cell membrane made up of? The cell membrane is made up of lipids, it is made up of proteins, and it contains some amount of carbohydrates, and also it contains some amount of cholesterol. Negligible, cholesterol is negligible amounts. So now you know it has lipids. Now we have to find out lipids. Is there cellulose anywhere in this what I have written? No. So this option is wrong. Here cellulose, no. Lipids and proteins, yes, it is made up of lipids and proteins. Lipids and chitin, nowhere chitin is there. So this option also can be eliminated. So the right option here is option C, lipids and proteins. Moving further, which of the following is incorrect about plasma membrane? So some of the statements are given here. Plasma membrane is present in both plant and animal cell. Yes, they are present in both the plant and the animal cell. Or they can ask the question as, which of the following is incorrect about cell membrane? Cell membrane and plasma membrane are one and the same. So present in both plant and animal cell. They are present in both plant and animal cell. That is true. It has phospholipid bilayer. Yes, it has. That is also true. Carbohydrates are never found in it. It contains cholesterol. It contains cholesterol. Yes, it has small traces of cholesterol. Carbohydrates are never present in it. No, they also contain carbohydrates. So therefore, option C is the right answer because this statement is incorrect regarding the cell membrane or plasma membrane. Next question. In cell membrane of eukaryotes, integral proteins are found in. What are integral proteins? Integral proteins, the name itself says integral, in between. So they are present in between or embedded or buried partially or completely within the phospholipid bilayer. So in cell membrane of eukaryotes, integral proteins are found where? That we have to see. On the surface, no. On the surface, actually it is peripheral proteins are present on the surface. Partially buried, totally buried. Both B and C are the right answer. That is option D is the right answer, because integral proteins can be partially buried or it can be fully or totally buried also. So both B and C is the right answer. Therefore, option D we have to choose here. Next question. The membrane of human erythrocytes has been found to contain approximately. So here I told you, we had not discussed this in the topic there. So we had learned that the lipid, that is the plasma membrane, mainly is made up of lipid, that is phospholipids, and it is also made up of carbohydrates. Do you think the concentration of carbohydrates, proteins, lipids and all that in all the organism is the same? No, the percentage can change, right? So that is what the question is about. So here in human erythrocytes, that is nothing but RBC, or red blood cell or red blood corpuscles. The membrane of human erythrocytes has been found to contain approximately. So how much of what it is made up of, that we have to see. So here first we have to remember in our mind that what is the lipid bilayer made up of? It is made up of, or what is the plasma membrane made up of? Lipids, proteins and carbohydrates and cholesterol. So now here protein is there, lipid is there, that's correct. Here also protein is there, lipid is there. Oligosaccharide, no, they don't have oligosaccharides in them. So we can eliminate these. These two options we can eliminate. Now we have to choose between this and this. So how much percentage of protein it is made up of, how much percentage of lipid it is made up of. So that is human erythrocyte, that is human RBC, how much it is made up of, because it is given in your NCERT textbook. That is why I have framed question for this. So it is 52% protein and 40% lipids, 40% protein and 52% lipids. The option A is the right answer here. The human RBC or the human erythrocyte, the membrane or the plasma membrane or the cell membrane of human erythrocyte or human RBC contains 52% protein and 40% lipid. So option A is the right answer here. Moving further, fluid mosaic model was proposed by Robert Brown. He has something to do with the cell. So Camillo Golgi apparatus was found out by him. So Robert Brown nucleus, Watson and Crick DNA. So their contribution is for the DNA. Here Singer and Nicholson are the two scientists who actually proposed the fluid mosaic model of plasma membrane. So option C is the right answer here. Next question, what is the primary function of the cell membrane in eukaryotic cell? Cell membrane has particular function. They prevent the entry of pathogens and other harmful substances into the cell, and they also give proper shape to the cell, and they prevent the spilling of the cytoplasmic content like that, and they are selectively permeable in nature. All those are there. Let's look into what is the primary function of the cell membrane or the plasma membrane. Protein synthesis, energy production, cellular communication, waste elimination. It is cellular communication, because if you remember where cell junctions are there, right? Plasma membrane or the lipid bilayers or the quasi-fluid nature of the lipid is very, very important for the cellular junctions to be maintained. So here the cells to cell communication actually happens because of the plasma membrane. But protein synthesis is by ribosomes. Energy production is by mitochondria. Waste elimination, it has nothing to do with lysosome helps in waste elimination. So here, the right answer here is cellular communication. The primary function of the cell membrane in eukaryotic cell is cell-to-cell communication or cellular communication, option C. Next question, which of the following is characteristic of the cell membrane in eukaryotic cells? It is permeable to all substances. It is primarily composed of carbohydrates. It regulates passage of substances into and out of the cell. It is rigid and static. So what we have to find out among these, which is the actual characteristic of the plasma membrane or the cell membrane, we need to find out. Cell membrane or plasma membrane is not permeable to all substances. It is only selectively permeable, wherein it allows only certain substances to enter into and move out of the cell. Therefore, this option is wrong. It is primarily composed of carbohydrates. No, it is not primarily composed of carbohydrates. It is primarily composed of lipids and proteins. Okay. So, therefore, this option needs to be eliminated. It regulates the passage of substances into and out of the cell. Yes, that is true. It regulates or it controls the passage of substances into the cell as well as out of the cell. Therefore, option C is the right answer here. It is rigid and static. No, they are not rigid. They are fluid in nature. We had studied, right? So, therefore, option D is also the wrong answer. Option C is the right option or answer here. Next question, what is the main component of the cell membrane in eukaryotic cell? Nucleic acid, phospholipids, carbohydrates, amino acid. The main component, though they are made up of carbohydrates and all that, it is phospholipids. So their main component is phospholipids. So that we have to choose. So it is always confusing. So you might think, oh ma'am, you had said that carbohydrates and it is made up of lipids, carbohydrates, and it is made up of proteins and all that. So why can't we choose between carbohydrates and amino acids here? Because proteins are nothing but chains of amino acids itself. So here, actually you have to look into the option wherein the question is what is the main component of the cell membrane? It is phospholipids. Instead of phospholipids, if they had given proteins, you could have written proteins. But here phospholipids is the major one. So that is why we have to choose option B. Which of the following process relies on the relative permeability of cell membrane in eukaryotes? Photosynthesis, osmosis, protein synthesis, cell division. So it is actually osmosis. So osmosis actually helps the substances to move into and out of the cell from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. So therefore, osmosis is the process that is involved here. So option B is the right answer here. So cell membrane, they are capable of letting or allowing certain substances to move in and out to the cell, right? Sometimes when the cells or the substances move into the cell without any use of any energy, then it is a passive transport. And if it uses energy, it is an active transport. Again, it uses energy wherein it moves from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. It is osmosis. When it moves from a lower concentration to higher concentration, it is diffusion. So here, which of the following process relies on the relative permeability of cell membrane in eukaryotes? Here, the permeability of the cell membrane depends on a process called as osmosis, wherein it allows the movement of substances into the cell and out of the cell depending on wherever the concentration is low. That is from higher concentration to lower concentration. Osmosis is the right answer here. Next, which of the following statement is true about the fluid mosaic model of the cell membrane? The membrane is rigid and static. No, it's wrong. Lipids and proteins are arranged randomly in the membrane. No, that's also wrong. The membrane is a solid structure with no flexibility. That is also wrong. Lipids and proteins are free to move laterally within the membrane. This is true. So that is about the fluid mosaic model. That's what it states, right? The phospholipids that are there, they are, or the plasma membrane has fluidity. It is fluidity in nature, wherein it can allow the proteins and the lipids to move here and there wherever it wants. So option D is the right answer here. So next question. The function of transport proteins in the cell membrane is to. So transport proteins, they can also be called as the carrier proteins. So carrier proteins are present in the So sometimes there are certain substances which are very important and needed for the cell's function, but it cannot enter into the cell. So it is at that time there are some carrier proteins or transport proteins which are present on the phospholipid bilayer that will actually help in the carrying of these particular substances. So what is the function of these transport protein? That is the question about. Maintain structural integrity of the membrane, facilitate movement of ions and molecules across the membrane, control the shape of the cell, exchange genetic material with neighboring cells. No, all that is wrong. It is actually facilitate movement of ions and molecules across the membrane, because some of the ions, they cannot easily enter in through the cell membrane into the cytoplasm of the cell. It is at that time these proteins act like a transport. They are called as the transport proteins or a carrier proteins. They act like vehicles wherein these ions go and cling to these carrier proteins, and then they are carried into the cytoplasm of the cell through the plasma membrane or through the cell membrane. So therefore, option B is the right answer here. Next question. Which type of proteins are embedded within the lipid bilayer of the cell membrane? Peripheral, no, they are present on the surface of the lipid bilayer. It is the integral protein. So, integral proteins is the right answer here. Which type of transport process requires energy input from the cell? I told you it is passive diffusion, facilitated diffusion, active transport. It is active transport. So, any type of transport of molecules into the cell and out of the cell which requires energy is called as active transport. So, this passive diffusion or facilitated diffusion is not the right answer, neither osmosis. Osmosis, passive diffusion, diffusion usually do not require energy, and osmosis also, it is the transport of substances from the higher concentration to lower concentration. Because it is from higher to lower, it will not require much of energy. So, here option C, that is active transport, is the right answer here. So, this was about the session wherein we learnt about the structure and the function of the cell membrane, and that is in eukaryotes, and also we got to know about the quasi-fluid nature of the cell membrane, and also we learned some of the MCQs that can be framed in question exam point of view under this particular topic. So, I hope you understood the session well. We shall meet again in the coming session taking up a new topic and learning the MCQs under it. So, see you in the next session. Thank you.